This is the brand new 2024 13-inch M3 MacBook Air, and I think it's a better laptop than most people are willing to give it credit for. Let's talk about it. Honestly, I can't really blame people for thinking that this computer is kinda whatever, because at least as far as the design goes, it remains unchanged from last generation. It's got that thin, sleek, and light form factor that's very easy to carry around. It has the same amount of ports. It even has the same colorways compared to last generation. In particular, I got it in this midnight version, which looks absolutely stellar in person, though it's also a bit of a controversial choice because, at least for last generation, it was very prone to picking up smudges and fingerprints. Supposedly for the M3 model in 2024, there's a brand new aluminum anodization process which aims to prevent those smudges and fingerprints a little better. In my experience, it's not foolproof. You're not going to get 100% rejection exactly, but I'll say that it is better than what I remember from last generation, so take that as you will. Though, shout out to Apple, the color match MagSafe cable is sick. What is also unchanged with this 2024 model is the Liquid Retina LCD display. The pixel density on this panel is pretty high, so images look sharp, and the color reproduction is great as well. So if you're planning to do any graphic design work or content consumption, this screen will be killer for that. Probably the only real downside that I can find with this screen is that it is 60 Hz, which is more of a complaint that I feel like I will hear in the comments more than me actually caring about it myself. When it comes to typing up documents, checking email, watching videos, I never really found myself asking for those extra frames. And I'll be real, that slight concern really went away once I realized that this base model computer that costs $1,100 is quick and snappy where it actually counts. Again, at $1,100, this MacBook Air is the cheapest way to get into a brand new computer with Apple's newest M3 SoC. I actually tried this chip a couple of months back when Apple refreshed the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro, and on that computer, it seemed a bit strange. Normally, you want these Pro machines with Pro specs, and thus, for more intensive workloads, you'll probably want to get it with the M3 Pro or M3 Max SoCs. But historically, where those systems were offered starting at $2,000, for some reason, Apple decided they needed to bridge a gap between the $1,600 and $2K price points. And so, the base model M3 MacBook Pro was born. Now, here in 2024, with this new MacBook Air, I think that base M3 SoC feels way more at home on this $1,100 laptop than it did with its Pro counterpart. This chip is certainly not going to win any awards in the performance department, especially when compared to the M2 from last generation. When looking at multi-core benchmarks, M3 is something like 10 to 20% faster, and therefore marginally better for more demanding tasks like photoshopping or video editing. But where you really feel the biggest difference is in single-threaded performance, which boosts a lot of the little things like scrolling, clicking around, loading web pages, and applications. All of these tasks individually might not seem like a big deal, but the extra layer of butter coated on top of everything thanks to that single-threaded performance makes everything feel snappier and quicker overall. Now, something else that the M3 brings to this year's MacBook Air is efficiency, which translates to better battery life overall. Now, I haven't had enough time to do crazy comprehensive tests with this thing, so a lot of my results are more simulated than anything else, but the battery does seem to perform marginally better than it did with the M2 MacBook Air. And you don't have to just take my word for it either. I was looking at Tom's Guide, and their review unit of the M3 Air lasted a whole hour longer than their M2 Air, which also fell in rough ballpark to what Apple was estimating with this laptop, which is about about 18 hours of battery life. Of course, it's all dependent on what you actually plan to do with this thing, but if you play to its strengths, which is productivity and media consumption, I think these estimates are actually fairly realistic. However, for me personally, I think what is most interesting about this release of the 2024 MacBook Air is what it actually does for the MacBook lineup. In their press materials, Apple really likes to compare the M3 in this MacBook Air to the M1, which is said to be about a 60% difference in performance, which is hardly surprising because the M1 is coming on 4 years old of a chip, which, to that point, Apple is finally discontinuing the M1 MacBook Air as well. So the release of this brand new computer actually bumps the M2 MacBook Air down to $1,000, effectively putting it where the M1 MacBook Air was. In a vacuum where I am comparing the M2 Air at $1,000 to this M3 Air at $1,100, I personally would probably spend the extra $100 and get the newer hardware that's a little more future-proof and also feels faster as well. However, as we know, MSRP is never gospel. And if the M1 Air is any indicator of how the M2 will be priced in the market, we could potentially see that laptop at $950, $900, even $800. Hell, go on Apple's website right now on the refurbished section, and you'll find M2 Airs for around $850. Which I think is an absolute bargain for a solid productivity laptop with amazing battery life and solid performance. The price drop on the M2 MacBook Air does certainly diminish the value of the M3 Air just a little bit, but if you do plan on going this route, I highly recommend upgrading it from the base 8 gigs of RAM up to 16 gigs of RAM. It is a bit egregious that Apple charges $200 for this in 2024, but I think it is absolutely essential to give you that extra performance headroom if you throw more demanding tasks at this and for the sake of future-proofing. Plus, on top of all of this, if choosing a MacBook wasn't already confusing enough, Apple's actually offering the base model 14-inch MacBook Pro on their refurbished store for $1,350. That computer sadly only still comes with 8 gigabytes of unified RAM, but for your extra $250 over this M3 Air, you get the really awesome 14-inch Liquid Retina XDR display with its adaptive 120Hz refresh rate, as well as that 1600 nits peak brightness in HDR. You get double the storage, so now it's at 512 gigs. You also get active cooling, so you're not gonna run into thermal throttling as much, and it also has a bigger physical battery. I personally think all of those factors are worth the $250 premium over the base M3 Air, but of course, this is all dependent on what you plan on using these computers for. Overall, I think this 13-inch MacBook Air is a solid update. Would I upgrade to it from an M2? Probably not. The performance gains aren't there to justify it, but I think this is really best for people that are upgrading from Intel Macs or even M1 MacBook Airs or MacBook Pros. I think those users will absolutely appreciate the extra performance here, as well as the added support for the next couple of years if you plan on using this machine long term. However, if you are on a stricter budget or looking for a simple secondary machine that can do basic productivity and web browsing, I think you can honestly save your money and just get an M2 Air, since those will be available at less than $1,000. But let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for watching this video on Denki channel.